It may seem a paradox to start a programme devoted to branch lines and byways on the 4-track layout at Standish Junction near Gloucester, where the former Great Western line to Swindon and the Midland line to Bristol diverged. But it was along these tracks on the local service between Gloucester, Stroud and Shalford that some of the last workings in the western region of the steam-powered push-pull auto trains, which were so much a part of the railway scene in the West Country for many decades, could be observed. Not all services were worked by the auto trains. A non-auto fitted 57XX pannier tank number 3681 leaves Stroud with a train for Shalford in September 1964. A War Department 280 passes along this busy line with a train of mineral empties near Bow Bridge Crossing Halt, one of a number of halts which the Great Western had opened between Stonehouse and Shalford, and which were served by the local trains which Edwin Wilmshurst had come to record. 042 tank number 1453 pushes its 2 auto trailers towards Stroud near Ham Mill Crossing Halt. When the engine was pushing, only the fireman remained on the loco. The driver sat in the leading auto trailer and used control equipment located there to drive the train. When a non-auto fitted loco such as this pannier tank was used, the engine had to run round its train for the return journey. A locomotive fitted for push-pull working did not need to perform this manoeuvre at termini. It was this feature which encouraged many British railway companies to use push-pull trains of various types to work branch lines and shorter local services. Several variations on this theme will be seen in the course of the programme. A train for Shalford leaves Bow Bridge Crossing Halt on the 12th of September 1964. These 042 tanks were introduced in 1932 to Collett's designs to replace older locomotives on workings such as these. The line from Swindon to Gloucester carried the normal complement of through passenger and goods trains, in addition to the local services to Shalford. Here, an unidentified Castle Class 460 passes with a mixed goods. A pannier tank departed from Bow Bridge Crossing Halt on the 12th of September 1964. For the return working, filmed from Butter Village above Bow Bridge, this non-auto fitted loco has had to run round its train of 2 auto trailers. The busy service of local trains between Gloucester and Shalford, with its mix of small halts and intermediate stations, had been inaugurated by the Great Western in 1903. It ended a few weeks after these scenes had been recorded in September 1964. With this site of one of the few survivors of the once majestic Castle Class, filthy, bereft of nameplates, and reduced to working an unfitted freight, the end of steam on the western region was clearly not far away. Auto trains were once a common sight on both main lines and branches in the west, including a regular service operating over the Tamar Bridge into Plymouth. And on West Country branches like that from here at Totnes to Ashburton, the 042 tank and 1 or 2 trailers was the mainstay of the passenger service. Part of this line still survives as the preserved Dart Valley Railway, but the section beyond Buckfastleigh to the original terminus at Ashburton has been closed. Many of the branch lines in the West Country were closed in the 1950s and 60s, including that from Newton Abbot to Morton Hampstead, which saw its last passenger train on the 2nd of March 1959. An earlier casualty was the 10.5-mile branch from Yelverton to Princetown high up on Dartmoor. This line opened in 1883 and was constructed for most of the way on the formation of a 4-foot 6-inch gauge mineral tramway which dated back to the 1820s. This was the first station on the branch. The line conveyed prisoners and their guards to Dartmoor Prison, some granite traffic for which the original tramway had been built, and in the summer, tourists to explore the wild and beautiful expanses of Dartmoor. The line climbed steeply for most of its way and abounded in sharp curves as it followed the contours of the hills to gain height. Much of the long-abandoned right-of-way is still clearly visible today. This halt was opened by the Great Western in February 1924. It had previously been served by the company's road services, skirting the nearby reservoir. Keith Christie had made the pilgrimage to travel on the line on the very last day of services, the 5th of March 1955. It was a bleak day, with mist clinging to the moor, suitably dismal weather to mark such a sad occasion. The very last train of all had to be strengthened and double-headed to cope with the crowds who came to pay their respects to this remote, often breathtaking railway. The closure of a branch line was still a relatively rare event in 1955, but it was something which those who loved railways would soon find was becoming an all-too-regular occurrence during the next decade. The double-headed last train, enveloped by the moorland mist. A Lambourne branch train leaves Newbury, the one-time great railway crossroads in Berkshire. In the 1930s, the Great Western had developed with AEC a series of diesel rail cars. From 1953 onwards, one of these, based at Reading, was frequently seen on the Lambourne service. The rail cars offered a more economical way of working secondary lines. In early British Railways' red and cream livery, one of these ex-Great Western rail cars heads east from Newbury. The main line through Newbury was crossed by the erstwhile Didcot, Newbury and Southampton route. For a short time in 1957, that famous preserved Great Western 440 City of Truro, reputedly the first steam locomotive ever to attain a speed of 100 miles an hour, was a regular performer on this line. In this sequence, filmed by Harry Luff, the locomotive arrived at Newbury on a train from Didcot and shunts into the sidings at the west end of the station. The classic Great Western branch line, worked by auto trailers, was not confined to the West Country. A castle thunders through Princess Risborough with an express from Paddington to Birmingham. Passing the North Box and arriving at the Bay platform is a pannier tank hauling an auto trailer, forming a service off the Watlington branch. This had been a line jointly owned by the Great Western and the Great Central, which explains why this signal box of Great Western design was controlling very un-Great Western upper quadrant signals. The Great Western Auto Train was to be found as close to London as Ealing Broadway, some 5 miles out from Paddington. This was the starting point for services on the Greenford branch, which had opened in 1904. Trains for Greenford ran along the relief lines until they reached West Ealing, where the branch itself diverged from the main line. An auto train arrived at West Ealing from Greenford, propelled by one of the relatively small number of pannier tanks of certain classes which were auto-fitted. A 61XX262 Prairie tank leaves West Ealing on a down-stopping service as expresses thunder past on the fast lines. In the middle of all this frenetic activity on the main lines, there was something incongruous about the little 042 tank and its trailers steaming off for Greenford. The auto train was the Great Western solution to the problem of how to work branch lines economically. British Railways turned to diesel traction in an attempt to cut the costs of running passenger services on lightly used branch lines, such as that which serves Saffron Walden and Audley End in Essex. A number of these four-wheel rail buses were built by both British and German manufacturers for use on such lines. In all, 22 rail buses entered service, the first appearing in 1958. Even earlier, in 1952, British United Traction built a series of light four-wheeled vehicles which could run in multiple. There were two types of power cars, classified as driving motor seconds and driver motor brake seconds, the latter having a compartment for the guard. Both had six-cylinder AEC engines. In addition, there was an unpowered trailer second. 11 vehicles were built in total, and after a period of evaluation, BR took them into stock. As built, they had skirts covering their underframes, but these were later removed. Harry Luff recorded a set of these rare vehicles at work on the branch between Watford Junction and St Albans Abbey. These cars and the rail buses were an interesting footnote to the programme of rapid dieselisation which got underway in the 1950s, but they failed to save any lines from closure and were withdrawn after relatively short careers. This is the view from the front of a rail car on the 21-mile-long former London and North Western branch from Banbury to Verney Junction as it bounces gently into Brackley Station. Two single-unit, lightweight, Derby-built diesel rail cars were brought into use in August 1956 in an effort to reduce an estimated annual loss of £14,000. A rail car from Banbury arrived at Fulwell and Westbury Station between Brackley and Buckingham. To coincide with the introduction of the rail cars, two new halts were opened at Radcliffe and Water Stratford to serve nearby villages. A number of passengers will be seen awaiting the rail car as it arrives at Water Stratford. Tickets were issued to passengers who got on at the new halts by the guard. This was a noble attempt by the often unfairly maligned British Railways to revive a line which had little obvious future, the stations often being too remote to encourage people to desert their newly acquired motor cars. Arriving at Buckingham. Here the rail cars from Banbury connected with steam push-pull trains which ran to Bletchley. The Banbury to Buckingham service finally succumbed on the last day of December 1960. The lightweight rail cars had given it a good stay of execution, but could not ultimately save the line from the inevitable fate befalling so many of England's country byways. Essendine, between Peterborough and Grantham on the East Coast Main Line, was some 88 miles from King's Cross, and since 1856 had been the junction for a 4.5-mile branch to Stamford. As the engine off the branch train runs round its stock at Essendine, a long fitted goods heads north on the main line behind an A2 Pacific. This was the only intermediate station on the former Great Northern Branch, 1 3/4 miles from Essendine. This line, which lost its passenger services on the 13th of June 1959, was often worked by the survivors of the Class N5062 tanks, a type introduced by the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway in 1891, before that company had transformed itself into the Great Central Railway. Although Stamford is still served by trains on the Leicester to Peterborough line, the steam push-pull trains which work the service to Seaton and the branch from there to Uppingham are long gone. A two-coach train leaves the bay platform at Stamford bound for Seaton. This was the only intermediate stop between Stamford and Luffenham, the junction for Seaton. The locomotive hauling this service into Ketton and Collie Weston was one of the post-war Ibert 262 tanks. The first batch of these were built by the LMS, the rest of the class appearing after nationalisation under the aegis of British Railways. At Luffenham, about 6 miles from Stamford, the former London North Western line to Seaton, which had at one time through services to Market Harborough and Rugby, diverged from the Midland route, busy then as now with freight traffic. A train from Seaton arrived at Luffenham, where the token was surrendered to the signalman. A mainline stopping service was in charge of a Type 4 peak diesel-electric, by now as much part of railway history as steam-hauled push-pull trains and the line to Seaton itself. The only intermediate station between Luffenham and Seaton was at Moorcott. The driver, in the comfort of the front coach, brings his train to a halt. At Seaton, the camera panned to catch a 9F hauling a long goods train across Haringworth Viaduct on the line still open for freight traffic, which left the Midland Main Line north of Kettering and joined the Stamford to Leicester route at Manton Junction. From Seaton, a short branch ran to Uppingham. This line, which closed in 1960, was another London north-western outpost in Midland territory. By the end, much of the coaching stock on the push-pull trains was decidedly shabby. There were two single lines north from Seaton. That on the right headed to Luffenham, whilst the Uppingham branch was nearest the camera. Again, the Uppingham line, like so many branches, the length and breadth of the country, was usually worked by a push-pull set. Moving back from rural Leicestershire to the metropolis to explore two steam-worked byways in and around London, a rebuilt Royal Scot hurried a northbound express along the West Coast Main Line through Harrow and Wealdstone. In the other direction, a train left Harrow to make the short journey to Belmont, the terminus since 1952 for passenger services on the Stanmore branch. When the line was opened to Stanmore in 1890, there were no intermediate stations on the 2-mile line. Belmont itself did not open until 1932 to cater for new housing development. The line lost a lot of traffic to the branch of the Metropolitan Railway from Wembley Park to Stanmore, which opened in 1932, and this became a steam-worked outpost in the heart of Metroland. Goods trains operated to the original terminus at Stanmore until July 1964, and the steam haul push-pull trains continued to shuttle between Harrow and Belmont until the line closed a few months later on the 5th of October. The very last passenger steam service to survive in the capital was on the southern part of the West London line, operating between Kensington Olympia and Clapham Junction. A BR Standard 262 tank from Nine Elms Depot runs round its train at Kensington Olympia. This service only ran at peak hours and was used mainly by post office workers. West London Line trains ceased to call at West Brompton in 1940, though the District Line platforms still enjoy a frequent service. The line crosses the River Thames on Chelsea Bridge. On the approach to Clapham Junction. The West London Line has had a checkered history, but today it has a regular electric service between Clapham Junction and Willesden Junction, and it is also used by the cross-channel Eurostars to reach their depot at North Pole Junction near Old Oak Common. Train from Kensington nears the end of its short journey. These services usually ran to and from platforms 16 or 17 at Clapham Junction. The loco runs round its coaches, ready for the return cross-river trip. The 4:46 p.m. to Kensington Olympia which left platform 17 at Clapham Junction on the 7th of July 1967, was the last regular steam-hauled passenger train on a local London service. With the end of steam on the southern region, diesel traction took over. A Class 33 often worked push-pull with a 4TC set. Such a formation departed from Clapham for its short journey up the West London line to Kensington Olympia. These films of steam and diesel workings on this London byway were made by Harry Luff. The steam turns on the West London line were operated by 9 Elms Shed, which was also a source of motive power for England's last steam main line from Waterloo to Weymouth, covered in an earlier volume in this series called appropriately Waterloo Sunset. Feeding into the main line were 2 steamwork branches, the first of these being that from Brockenhurst to Lymington. West Country Class Pacific 34041 Wilton and Battle of Britain Class Pacific 34087 145 Squadron speed through Lymington Junction on mainline services. With New Forest ponies grazing peacefully in the foreground, a BR Standard Class 4 264 tank rolled through the heathland with its 2-coach train on the way to Lymington. There was only one intermediate station on the branch which opened in the 1860s, and unlike most of the lines seen in this programme, it is still in use today. It was built to connect with the ships which ran from Lymington Pier to Yarmouth on the Isle of Wight. Here the British Railways owned car ferry, Freshwater, built in 1959, approached Lymington Pier at the end of a journey from the island. Though the railway to Yarmouth closed as early as 1953, rare colour footage is presented in the programme in this series entitled Rails in the Isle of Wight Colour Films 1953 to 1993. On the 1st of April 1967, Standard Class 4 tank number 80152 left the station at Lymington Pier with a train for Brockenhurst. The distance between the stations at Lymington Pier and Lymington Town was only about half a mile. The line was electrified as part of the Waterloo to Bournemouth scheme, which finally ended steam traction on the southern region in the summer of 1967. Wareham, between Poole and Weymouth, was the junction for the branch to Swanage. Rebuilt Merchant Navy Class Pacific number 35005 Canadian Pacific departed as BR Standard Class 5 460 number 73069 headed an eastbound goods through the station as 262 tank number 41320 waited in the bay platform with the Swanage branch train. The branch left the main line at Wargret Junction, a few miles west of Wareham. It also enjoyed some through services to Waterloo. West Country Pacific 34107 Blandford Forum was seen on the 11:34 a.m. from Swanage on the 13th of July 1963. These through trains were later diesel-hauled. The one intermediate station on the line was at the picturesque village of Corfe Castle, which took its name from the adjacent and equally picturesque ruined fortress. Edwin Wilmshurst climbed the castle mount with his cine camera on the 13th of July 1963 to record comings and goings through the station. M7 class 044 tank engines, a design first introduced by the London and South Western Railway in 1897, were still working push-pull trains on the branch at that time. As number 30667 arrived at Corfe Castle, from Edwin Wilmshurst's elevated perspective, the station and its surroundings looked like part of a rather sophisticated model railway. A year before the end of steam working on the southern region, West Country Pacific number 34047 Callington brings a Swanage to Waterloo through train into Corfe Castle in August 1966. The branch survived the end of southern region steam by a few years before losing its passenger services in 1972. A preservation scheme aimed at restoring the line makes Swanage Station once again a mecca for enthusiasts for southern steam. Crowds throng the platform at Havant in Hampshire. They are not here to see a steam special, nor was this the last day of service on the Hayling Island branch. This was the scene on a typical sunny summer Sunday, the 25th of June 1961, when it looked as though half the population of Portsmouth and the surrounding areas had decided to spend a day at the seaside and had opted for Hayling Island. The diminutive tank engine certainly struggled to get its heavily laden train underway. The 4.5-mile branch of the former London, Brighton and South Coast Railway from Havant to Hayling Island was the last haunt of the long-lived A1X Class 060 tanks. Commonly known as terriers, they were introduced by Stroudley for suburban services around London in 1872. Some of the dozen or so survivors which lasted into the 1960s were used on this line because the weak condition of the Langston Bridge, which linked Hayling Island to the mainland, precluded the use of anything heavier than a terrier. Number 32670 hurried a train across the Langston Bridge on a Sunday in July 1961, the tiny tank engine dwarfed by its coaches. Number 32661 had its bunker replenished from the improvised coaling stage at Hayling Island. The starting signal at the station was believed to be the only LB and SC lower quadrant signal still in use by June 1961. The van, which was usually part of the formation, was used to carry the prams and pushchairs belonging to day trippers. Services on the Hayling Island branch finally ended in 1963, though a number of the gallant little terriers which finished their long careers on its trains ended up in the hands of preservationists. Guildford still had two southern region routes operated by steam locomotives up to the mid-1960s. The engine, which had just arrived with a service from Horsham, ran round its train via platform 2 at the station. Having propelled its train out of platform 3, 262 tank number 41301 brought the empty stock into platform 2, ready to form the return working to Horsham. (41301) left Guildford on the 10:34 service to Horsham on the 6th of June 1964. The single-track branch to Christ's Hospital and Horsham left the route to Portsmouth south of Guildford at Pease Marsh Junction. The first station on the route was Bramley and Wonersh. On the 17th of October 1964, a train bound for Guildford arrived at the station. A number of the LMS design 262 tanks seen on these services were employed with considerable success throughout the southern region, to replace aging pre-grouping types on routes such as these. 41287 called at Bramley with the 134 train from Guildford to Horsham on the 17th of October 1964. A Guildford-bound train was travelling at speed on the curving single track between Bramley and Cranley. This part of the home counties was covered in snow on the 26th of January 1963. A train for Horsham headed south out of Cranley. The next northbound departure was the 1209 from Horsham, hauled by 262 tank number 41294. Three miles south of Cranley was Baynard's, the next station on this former London, Brighton and South Coast route. There was more snow on the ground on the 6th of March 1963 as the 10:34 a.m. Guildford to Horsham steamed south out of Baynard's through the wintry landscape. On the same day, one of the Bullard design Q1 class 060s number 33009 left Baynard's with the 1209 train from Horsham. Selective cleaning of its filthy cabside has transformed the BR number into its original Southern Railway identity, C9. Baynard's in more temperate climes now, as 262 tank number 41294 left with an evening service to Guildford in the summer of 1964. An unidentified sister locomotive headed south with the 1034 Guildford to Horsham on the 11th of May 1963. The final scene at Baynard's recorded the motive power and rolling stock used on the line before the arrival of the Ivat tanks. An H-class 044 tank and 3-carriage push-pull set arrived from Horsham. The next station on the way to Horsham was at Rudgwick, where the notices announcing the demise of the line were on display in May 1965. Promoted by the grandly named Horsham and Guildford Direct Railway Company, the line opened on the 2nd of October 1865 and just failed to make its centenary, closing on the 14th of June 1965. 9 years earlier, in 1956, the line was under no serious threat, as the Guildford to Horsham pickup goods called at Rudgwick, hauled by LB&SC C2X class 060 number 32541. The goods was put into the loop to make way for a Horsham to Guildford passenger service, hauled by another pre-grouping class, a Southeastern and Chatham H-class tank fitted for push-pull working. Christ's Hospital, where the Guildford direct line met the mid-Sussex route. This was a large station 2.5 miles south of Horsham. It was opened in 1902 in anticipation of housing developments which did not take place. The final scenes on this delightful line were taken in May 1965, the month before it closed, as number 41287 left Christ's Hospital on the last leg of the journey towards Horsham. The line from Guildford to Red Hill was part of a long cross-country route from Reading to the Channel ports, which became a part of the Southeastern and Chatham system in 1852. This was at Shalford, the first station east from its junction with the Portsmouth direct line south of Guildford. Domshall was 8 miles east of Guildford on this double-track secondary main line. On the 17th of October 1964, N-Class Mogul number 31410 left the station with a train to Red Hill. Sister Loco number 31858 made a splendid departure later in the day. Two unidentified moguls, followed by a BR Standard mogul, passed in the other direction with trains for Guildford. This line was threatened with closure under the Beeching Acts, but happily still survives. A final view shows one of Bulleid's extraordinary-looking Q1060s passing light engine through Betchworth on its way to Red Hill. Our journey along the final group of Southern Region byways in this programme begins at Grove Junction, Tunbridge Wells. An H-Class 044 tank swung off the Hastings line and headed for Tunbridge Wells West. A local goods working from Tunbridge Wells West was hauled by a BR Standard Class 4 264 tank. This was Tunbridge Wells West Station, filmed on the 23rd of December 1961. H-Class tank number 31544 was on a push-pull service to Oxted. Three of the Brighton-built Standard Class 4 tanks were seen on passenger workings at the station. The motive power depot was conveniently, for railway enthusiasts, situated beside the station. Another H-Class left, bound for Oxted. 31543 had just arrived at Oxted from Tunbridge Wells West. The train shunted out of the station and back into another platform to enable the engine to take water. The two-coach push-pull was soon ready to return to Tunbridge Wells West. H-Class tanks number 31543 and 31522 were seen at Edenbridge Town, working push-pull trains on the service between Oxted and Tunbridge Wells West. Further down the line, H-Class hauled trains at Cowden. At Eridge, south of Tunbridge Wells, on the 18th of November 1961, 262 tank number 41261 leaves with a train for London, which combined coaches from Brighton via Uckfield and from Eastbourne via the Cuckoo line. The junction of these two routes was at Redgate Mill, just south of Eridge. A Standard Class 4 264 tank headed a train bound for Uckfield and Brighton near the junction. Another member of this class, number 80053, leaves the Uckfield line at Redgate Mill with the 1239 Tunbridge Wells West to Eastbourne service on the 13th of January 1962. The first station south of the junction on this byway to the south coast was Rotherfield and Mark Cross. Standard tank number 80413 headed north on the 18th of November 1961. Later that day, number 80143 appeared again with another northbound train. These views of Heathfield Station were taken looking south from the hill through which the line tunnelled immediately north of the station. The Cuckoo Line closed to passengers north of Hailsham on the 14th of June 1965. On the 11th of May in that year, number 80143 was again the engine on duty with this northbound train. N-Class 260 number 31871 left Hailsham with a local service to Eastbourne. These trains continued to run for a few years after the ending of passenger services north of Hailsham. The line from Erridge to Uckfield is still open, but the section from there to Lewes was closed in 1969. Southern Region diesel multiple units took over the working of this route with the ending of steam traction. Cromer Beach Station in 1958, one of the several termini of the Midland and Great Northern Joint Railway. The closure of most of this straggling, mainly rural system in 1959 was one of the first major blows to the English railway network, a nasty foretaste of what was to follow in the beaching era. Leaving Yarmouth Beach, the train passed Nelson Road South Box. In this view, the impressive swing bridge over Breydon Water was open for river traffic. At Martham, a train bound for distant Peterborough crossed a train for Yarmouth. One of the Ivat-designed 260s, which distinguished themselves on these lines, arrived at Potter Heigham. North Walsham Town, the Midland Great Northern Station, was close to that on the former Great Eastern Line to Cromer, which is still open. As late as 1958, this new connection between the two lines was built. A train departed from North Walsham, heading across country to Melton Constable on the Midland Great Northern Line. A train pulled away from Corpusty and Saxthorpe Station on its way to Melton Constable. The four-way junction at Melton Constable was at the heart of the system. The engine shed was beside the station. Edwin Wilmshurst had set out to record as much of this East Anglian byway as he possibly could. These scenes were taken on a bitterly bleak afternoon with few passengers in sight. Just west of the station, the line from Cromer, part of which is now preserved as the North Norfolk Railway, met the main line. In January 1959, an Ivat mogul was at the head of the 139 train for Yarmouth. Of the 162 locomotives in this class, built from 1947 onwards, only one example evaded the cutting torch. Another tentacle of this 125-mile system was the line from the terminal station at Norwich City northwards to Melton Constable. Service on this section was already being provided by DMUs. Drayton was the first station out of Norwich. Like much of the Midland Great Northern, this line was mostly single track. The DMU pulled away from Attlebridge. The use of diesel traction did not save the passenger services on this part of the system from the axe, which fell in 1959. Lenwade Station recedes from view. At Whitwell, a DMU heading south to Norwich City crossed the northbound service. Guestwick was the second last stop before Melton Constable. A curiosity at Melton was this private platform, built for the use of Lord Hastings. Heading west from Melton, a train from Yarmouth called at Thursford, where there was time to examine the station's architecture and the small goods yard before moving on. The line continued westwards to King's Lynn. The Midland Great Northern station at South Lynn was some distance away from the town. The Yarmouth to Birmingham through train left South Lynn. Sutton Bridge, renowned for its swing bridge, was also an important junction, where the line from Peterborough joined the main East Coast route. The Peterborough line diverged beyond the bridge. A train bound for Peterborough arrived at Sutton Bridge, hauled by another of the ubiquitous Ivett moguls. The Yarmouth to Birmingham train crossed the bridge and headed west. Through Long Sutton. And then crossed the River Welland at Welland Bank Junction on the approach to Spalding. We leave the main line of the Midland Great Northern as the train passed through Bourne to go back and see something of the line from Peterborough. At Murrow West, the single-track Midland Great Northern branch crossed the double tracks of the March to Spalding line on the level. Murrow East was the Midland Great Northern station at this fascinating location. On to Wisbeach North, the joint line station here on the north bank of the River Nene. Our final view of the Midland Great Northern is of a train from Peterborough North arriving at the station. Crossing the River Nene, but staying in the vicinity of Wisbeach to conclude the programme with Harry Luff's footage of perhaps that most singular of English railway byways, the roadside tramway, which ran from Wisbeach to Upwell. The the steam tramway engines, the inspiration for Toby, one of the Reverend Audrey's most famous characters, had been withdrawn by this time, and a Drury diesel mechanical loco, complete with tramway skirts, was working the line still apparently substantial goods traffic. This sublime anachronism seems a most appropriate conclusion to the exploration of some of the more interesting backwaters of the railways of England, which have been presented during the course of this programme.